Sarah had always dreamed of this moment. After 3 years of dating Mark, she was finally going to meet his parents. She stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her dress for the 5th time. Everything had to be perfect. Mark had been acting strange lately, more nervous than usual, and she wondered if tonight would be the night he would finally propose. The drive to his parents' house was quiet. Mark's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and he kept glancing at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When they pulled into the driveway of the beautiful suburban home, Sarah felt her heart race with excitement and nervousness. Mark's parents, Robert and Linda, greeted them warmly at the door. The house smelled of roasted chicken and fresh flowers. Linda had prepared an elaborate dinner, complete with Sarah's favorite dessert that Mark had mentioned she loved. The gesture touched Sarah deeply, and she felt a surge of hope that this family might soon become hers. During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally. Robert asked about Sarah's job at the marketing firm, and Linda shared stories about Mark's childhood. Sarah felt herself relaxing, enjoying the warmth and acceptance she felt from his parents. Mark, however, seemed increasingly tense as the evening progressed. After dessert, Robert suggested they move to the living room. Sarah noticed Mark exchange a meaningful look with his father. Her heart began to pound. This was it. This had to be the moment she had been waiting for. Robert cleared his throat and smiled at Sarah. "Sarah, Linda and I have been talking, and we think you're wonderful for our son." Sarah felt tears of joy begin to form in her eyes. "We've decided to give Mark something very special to celebrate this relationship." Sarah held her breath as Robert reached into his jacket pocket, but instead of pulling out a small velvet box as she expected, he produced a set of car keys. Her smile faltered slightly, confusion replacing anticipation. "These are the keys to my 1967 Mustang," Robert announced proudly. "It's been in our family for generations. My father gave it to me when I got engaged to Linda, and now I want to pass it on to Mark." Sarah looked at Mark, expecting to see excitement on his face. Instead, she saw something that made her stomach drop. Mark was shaking his head slowly, his face pale. "Dad, I can't accept this," Mark said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent. Robert's face showed confusion and hurt. "What do you mean, son? This car means everything to our family. It's tradition." Mark stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. "I appreciate the gesture, I really do, but I can't take the car." He looked directly at Sarah, and she saw something in his eyes that frightened her. "Sarah and we're not getting engaged." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face as the room began to spin slightly. Linda gasped, and Robert's mouth fell open in shock. "Mark, what are you saying?" Sarah managed to whisper, her voice cracking. Mark couldn't meet her eyes. "I've been trying to find the right way to tell you, Sarah. I've been accepted to medical school in California. I'm leaving next month." Sarah felt as though the world had stopped turning. "California? But you never mentioned applying to schools there. What about your job here? What about us?" "I applied months ago," Mark admitted, finally looking at her. "I didn't tell you because I didn't think I'd get in, but I did. And this is my dream, Sarah. I have to go. So take me with you," Sarah said desperately, reaching for his hand. "We can make this work. People do long distance, or I could find a job there." Mark pulled his hand away gently, and that gesture broke something inside Sarah's chest. "Sarah, you have your whole life here, your family, your job, your friends. I can't ask you to give all that up for me." "But you're not asking," Sarah said, tears now flowing freely. "I'm offering. I love you, Mark. I thought you loved me too." "I do love you," Mark said, his own eyes filling with tears. "That's why I can't let you sacrifice everything for someone who doesn't even know what he wants yet." Robert and Linda sat in stunned silence, watching their son's relationship crumble before their eyes. The beautiful evening that had started, with such promise, was turning into a nightmare. Sarah stood up on shaky legs, grabbing her purse from the coffee table. "I need to go," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I need to process this." "Sarah, please," Mark called after her as she headed toward the door. "Let me drive you home. We can talk about this." "No," Sarah said firmly, turning back to Wei. Face him one last time. "You've made your decision, Mark. You've had months to think about this, and you chose not to include me in any of it. That tells me everything I need to know about what I mean to you." As Sarah walked out into the cool, evening air, she heard Linda's voice behind her, scolding Mark for his handling of the situation. But the words felt distant and muffled, as if she were underwater. She called a taxi and waited on the front steps, trying to make sense of what had just happened. 3 years of her life, 3 years of planning a future with someone who had apparently been planning a future without her. The engagement ring she had been expecting was replaced by the crushing weight of rejection and betrayal. The taxi arrived, and as Sarah climbed in, she looked back at the house one last time. Through the window, she could see Mark sitting with his head in his hands while his parents tried to comfort him. Part of her wanted to run back inside and fight for their relationship, but a larger part of her knew that Mark had already made his choice. As the taxi pulled away, Sarah realized that sometimes the most painful truths come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. She had expected a ring and a proposal. Instead, she got a car she would never drive and a lesson about love she would never forget. The weeks following that devastating evening at Mark's parents' house passed in a blur of tears, sleepless nights, and well-meaning friends trying to cheer Sarah up. She threw herself into work, staying late at the office to avoid going home, to an empty apartment that still held traces of Mark everywhere. His coffee mug in the sink, his favorite book on her nightstand, his jacket hanging in her closet. Jessica, her best friend and co-worker, finally confronted her on a Friday afternoon when she found Sarah crying over her laptop in the break room. "Okay, that's enough," Jessica said, sitting down beside her. "You can't keep torturing yourself like this. He made his choice, and now you need to make yours." Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue. "What choice?" "He's gone, Jess. 3 years down the drain." "The choice to move forward," Jessica said firmly. "Look, I know this hurts, but maybe this is the universe telling you that you deserve better. Someone who wouldn't keep such a huge secret from you." Sarah wanted to argue, to defend Mark, but she couldn't find the words. Deep down, she knew Jessica was right. The Mark she thought she knew would never have applied to medical school without telling her. The Mark she loved would have included her in such a major life decision. That weekend, Sarah's sister Emma came over with ice cream and tissues, ready for what she called Operation Heartbreak Recovery. They spent Saturday going through Sarah's apartment, boxing up Mark's belongings, and removing all traces of their relationship. It was painful but necessary, like cleaning out an infected wound. "You know what bothers me most?" Sarah said as she folded one of Mark's t-shirts. "It's not even that he chose medical school over me. It's that he didn't trust me enough to be part of the decision. He treated me like I was some fragile thing that couldn't handle the truth." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe he was protecting himself more than he was protecting you." The comment stuck with Sarah long after Emma left. She began to see Mark's actions in a different light. Perhaps his secrecy wasn't about not loving her enough, but about loving her too much and being afraid of what her reaction might be. Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor to Sarah's office. Linda, Mark's mother, appeared at her desk looking nervous and apologetic. "I hope you don't mind me coming here," Linda said quietly. "I got your work address from Mark. I know I probably should have called first." Sarah's heart raced. "Is Mark okay?" Did something happen? He's fine. Physically, Linda said, taking the chair across from Sarah's desk. But he's miserable, Sarah. He's been staying with us since that night, and he barely eats or sleeps. He just stares out the window most of the time. Sarah felt a mix of sadness and anger. Linda, I appreciate you coming, but if Mark has something to say to me, he should say it himself. That's just it, Linda said, leaning forward. He thinks he's lost the right to talk to you. He knows he handled everything wrong, and he's convinced himself that you hate him. I don't hate him, Sarah admitted quietly. I'm hurt and angry, but I don't hate him. Linda reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. He asked me to give you this. He wrote it the day after you left but was too afraid to give it to you himself. Sarah stared at the envelope, her name written in Mark's familiar handwriting across the front. Her hands trembled as she took it from Linda. I'll leave you to read it in private, Linda said, standing up. But Sarah, I want you to know that Robert and I think you're perfect for our son. What he did was wrong, but his feelings for you are real. After Linda left, Sarah sat staring at the letter for nearly an hour before finding the courage to open it. Mark's words were raw and honest, filled with regret and explanations that came too late. He wrote about how he had applied to the California school on a whim, never expecting to get in. When the acceptance letter came, he panicked. He had always dreamed of being a doctor, but he had also dreamed of a future with Sarah. The two dreams seemed incompatible, and instead of talking to her about it, he had chosen to make the decision, alone. He wrote about the night at his parents' house, how he had originally planned to propose to Sarah and then tell his parents about medical school. But seeing his father's joy about passing down the family car, seeing how excited his parents were about welcoming Sarah into the family, he realized he couldn't go through with the engagement knowing he was planning to leave. I thought I was protecting you, he wrote. I thought if I proposed and then told you about California, it would be even more unfair. I see now that by trying to protect you from a difficult choice, I took away your right to make that choice at all. I was a coward, Sarah, and I'm sorry. Sarah read the letter 3 times, each reading bringing a different emotion. First anger, then sadness, then something she wasn't quite ready to name. Understanding, maybe, or forgiveness. That evening, she found herself driving to Mark's parents' house without really deciding to go there. She sat in her car outside, staring at the house where her world had fallen apart just a few weeks ago. Mark appeared in the doorway as if he had sensed her presence. He walked slowly to her car, looking older and more tired than she had ever seen him. When he reached her window, she rolled it down. Hi, he said simply. Hi, she replied. They looked at each other for a long moment, and Sarah saw her own pain reflected in his eyes. I got your letter, she said finally. Mark nodded. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know the truth. Why didn't you just tell me from the beginning? Sarah asked, the question that had been haunting her for weeks. Mark looked down at his hands. Because I knew you'd tell me to follow my dreams, even if it meant leaving you behind. And I knew that if you said that, I'd love you even more. And leaving would hurt even worse. Sarah felt tears start again, but this time they weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of recognition, of finally understanding the boy she had fallen in love with and the complicated way his mind worked. Mark, she said softly, you should have trusted me to be stronger than you thought I was. After that conversation outside his parents' house, Sarah and Mark began talking again. Not as lovers trying to rebuild their relationship, but as two people trying to understand what had gone wrong and how to move forward. They met for coffee, twice that week. Carefully neutral conversations that danced around the bigger questions neither was ready to address. Mark looked terrible. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and regret. Sarah found herself wanting to comfort him, but she held back. They were still too raw, too hurt to offer each other that kind of tenderness. "When do you leave for California?" Sarah asked during their second coffee meeting, stirring sugar into her latte with unnecessary focus. "Classes start in 6 weeks," Mark said quietly. "But I've been thinking about deferring for a year." Sarah looked up sharply. "Why?" "Because leaving now feels like running away," Mark admitted. "Because I hurt you, and I don't want that to be how our story ends." "Mark, you can't put your life on hold because of guilt," Sarah said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "That would just make everything worse." They talked for another hour, carefully navigating the minefield of their shared history and uncertain future. When Sarah got home that night, she felt emotionally drained, but somehow clearer than she had in weeks. The next morning, Jessica cornered her in the office kitchen. "Okay? What's going on? You look different today? Less like someone kicked your puppy and more like someone who's actually thinking clearly for the first time in a month." Sarah poured herself coffee and considered how to explain what she was feeling. "I think I'm starting to understand what happened. Not that it makes it okay, but I'm beginning to see why Mark did what he did." "Please tell me you're not getting back together with him," Jessica said, concern evident in her voice. "Sarah, he lied to you for months. He kept a massive secret that affected your entire future together." "I know," Sarah said. "And I'm not saying I'm ready to forgive him or that we have a future together. But I'm starting to see that maybe this wasn't about him not loving me enough. Maybe it was about him loving me too much and not knowing how to handle it." Jessica looked skeptical. "That sounds like you're making excuses for him." "Maybe I am," Sarah admitted. "Or maybe I'm just trying to understand so I can move on with some kind of peace." That weekend, Sarah did something she hadn't done since: the breakup. She called her grandmother, the woman who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when Sarah was 12. Grandma Rose had always been her source of wisdom and comfort, but Sarah had been too embarrassed and hurt to talk about the Mark situation. "I was wondering when you were going to call," Grandma Rose said in her warm, slightly raspy voice. "Emma told me what happened with that boy of yours." Sarah found herself crying as she told her grandmother the whole story. Rose listened without interrupting, making small sounds of understanding and sympathy at appropriate moments. "Honey," Rose said when Sarah finished, "let me tell you something about love and fear. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones we hurt worst because they're the ones we have the most to lose." "But Grandma, he didn't trust me," Sarah protested. "He made this huge decision without me." "No, baby. He didn't trust himself," Rose corrected gently. "He didn't trust that he was strong enough to choose love over ambition or smart enough to find a way to have both. So he tried to make the choice for both of you." The conversation with her grandmother planted a seed in Sarah's mind that grew over the following days. She began to think about her own dreams and ambitions, things she had put on the back burner while building a life with Mark. She remembered her old dream of starting her own marketing consultancy, something she had talked about but never pursued, because it seemed too risky with a wedding and mortgage on the horizon. On Tuesday, she surprised herself by scheduling a meeting with her boss to discuss the possibility of going freelance while maintaining some contract work with the firm. Her boss, Patricia, was supportive and offered to be her first client if she decided to take the leap. That evening, Sarah found herself looking at apartments online, not because she needed to move, but because she was curious about what other options were available. She discovered a loft downtown that would be perfect for a home office, with big windows and exposed brick walls that made her heart race with possibility. When Mark called that Wednesday to ask if they could meet again, Sarah agreed, but this time she suggested they meet at the downtown loft she had been looking at. She arranged a viewing and asked him to meet her there. Mark arrived looking confused and slightly worried. "Sarah, what is this place?" "It's an apartment I'm thinking about renting," Sarah said, leading him through the space. "I'm thinking about starting my own business, and this would be perfect for a home office. Mark looked around the loft, taking in the high ceilings and urban atmosphere. This is amazing, Sarah. But why are you showing it to me? Sarah leaned against the kitchen counter, looking at him seriously. Because I've been thinking about what you said, about following dreams and making hard choices. I realize I've been so focused on being angry about your choice that I forgot I have choices too. What do you mean? I mean, maybe you weren't the only one who was afraid, Sarah said slowly. Maybe I was so comfortable in our relationship, so focused on the future we had planned, that I stopped thinking about the future I might want for myself. Mark sat down on the window ledge, processing her words. Are you saying you're glad we broke up? I'm saying maybe we both needed to be forced to think about what we really want, Sarah replied. You have this incredible opportunity in California, and instead of celebrating that with you, I made it about what it meant for us. Sarah, you had every right to be upset, Mark said. I handled everything wrong. Yes, you did, Sarah agreed. But maybe we were both settling into something comfortable, instead of chasing something extraordinary. They talked for an hour in that empty loft, with sunlight streaming through the tall windows and dust motes dancing in the air between them. For the first time since that awful night at his parents' house, they talked honestly about their individual dreams and fears, not just about their relationship. When they finally left the loft, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: excitement about her own future, separate from any romantic relationship. Mark walked her to her car, and they stood there awkwardly for a moment, not sure how to say goodbye. Sarah, Mark said finally, I want you to know that even though I messed everything up, these 3 years with you were the best of my life. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't the bitter tears she had grown accustomed to. Mine, too, Mark. And that's why I'm going to remember them as something beautiful, not something that was ruined. 3 weeks before Mark's departure to California, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She rented the downtown loft and gave her notice at the marketing firm. Patricia was thrilled to offer her a consulting contract that would provide steady income while she built her own client base, and within days, Sarah had 3 other potential clients interested in her services. The transformation in Sarah was visible to everyone around her. The hollow-eyed, heartbroken woman of a month ago was replaced by someone energized and focused on building something new. Emma commented that she hadn't seen her sister this excited about anything in years. It's like you've woken up from a long sleep, Emma said as they painted the walls of Sarah's new loft on a Saturday morning. I love Mark, you know I do, but maybe this breakup was exactly what you needed. Sarah paused with her paint roller halfway up the wall. That's a terrible thing to say about someone's relationship ending. Is it, though? Emma challenged. Look at you, Sarah. You're starting your own business. You're living in this amazing space. You're taking control of your life in a way you never did when you were planning your whole future around someone else's timeline. The comment stung because it held more truth than Sarah wanted to admit. She had been happy with Mark, genuinely happy, but she realized now that it was a passive kind of happiness. She had been content to let their relationship be the main focus of her life, to make decisions based on what was best for them as a couple rather than what she might want for herself. That afternoon, while Emma ran out to get more paint supplies, Sarah received an unexpected call from Robert, Mark's father. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling, Robert said, his voice carrying the same nervous tone she remembered from that first dinner. Linda gave me your number. I wanted to talk to you about something. Of course, Robert. Is everything okay? Well, that depends on how you define okay, Robert said with a slight laugh. Mark is leaving for California tomorrow, but he's been impossible to live with these past few weeks. He keeps talking about how he should have done things differently, how he wishes he could fix things with you. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Robert, I appreciate you calling, but Mark and I have talked. We both understand that sometimes things just don't work out the way you plan. That's just it, Sarah. I don't think either of you really believes that, Robert said. I've been watching my son for the past month, and I've never seen him more miserable. But I've also been hearing about you from Linda, how you're starting your own business and making all these positive changes in your life. I'm not sure what you're getting at, Sarah said, though she had a growing suspicion about where this conversation was headed. I'm getting at the fact that maybe you're both being too stubborn and scared to fight for something worth fighting for, Robert said bluntly. Look, I know Mark hurt you, and I know he handled everything wrong. But Sarah, I've seen the way that boy looks at you, and I've seen the way you look at him. That doesn't just disappear because of one mistake, even a big one. Sarah found herself pacing around her half-painted loft, phone pressed to her ear. Robert, even if that's true, what are you suggesting? Mark is leaving tomorrow. He has this amazing opportunity in California. California isn't on another planet, Sarah. It's a 6-hour flight away. The simplicity of that statement hit Sarah like a revelation. In all her thinking about Mark's decision to go to medical school, she had framed it as an either-or situation. Either they stayed together and he gave up his dream, or he followed his dream and they broke up. She had never seriously considered a third option. Robert, are you suggesting that Mark and I should try to make a long-distance relationship work? I'm suggesting that two people who love each other should at least try to find a way to make it work before they give up entirely, Robert said. Sarah, that car I tried to give Mark, it belonged to my father, and he gave it to me when I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. Sarah stopped pacing. What do you mean? I was 23, fresh out of college, and I had a job. Offer in New York that would have launched my career, Robert explained. But Linda and I had been dating for 2 years, and she was starting her teaching job here. I was convinced I had to choose between love and ambition. What did you do? I turned down the job, Robert said quietly. I chose Linda, and I thought I was being noble and romantic. But you know what happened? I resented it. Not right away, but eventually. I loved Linda. But part of me always wondered what would have happened if I had taken that job. Sarah felt her heart racing as she processed what Robert was telling her. It took us 3 years of couples counseling to work through the resentment I had built up, Robert continued. And you know what we learned? Love isn't about choosing each other over your dreams. Real love is about finding a way to support each other's dreams, even when it's hard. But Robert, medical school is 4 years, plus residency. That's a long time to be apart. It is a long time, Robert agreed. But Sarah, you're starting your own business. That means you have flexibility that most people don't have. And Mark will have breaks between semesters, opportunities to come home, or for you to visit him. Sarah sank down onto her couch, overwhelmed by the possibility Robert was presenting. Does Mark know you're calling me? God, no. Robert laughed. He'd probably never speak to me again if he knew I was meddling. But Sarah, I'm an old man who learned too late that pride and fear make terrible relationship counselors. I don't want to see two people I care about make the same mistakes I made. After Robert hung up, Sarah sat in her loft surrounded by paint cans and drop cloths, her mind racing. Everything she thought she knew about her situation with Mark was being challenged. She had been so focused on the hurt of his deception that she hadn't considered whether there might be a path forward that didn't require either of them to give up their dreams. When Emma returned with paint supplies, she found Sarah staring out the window with a strange expression on her face. What happened while I was gone? Emma asked, setting down the bags. You look like someone just told you the world is actually flat. Sarah turned to face her sister. Emma, what would you say if I told you I was thinking about trying to work things out with Mark? Emma's face went through several expressions before settling on concerned confusion. I'd say that's a complete 180 from where you were an hour ago. What brought this on? Sarah told her about the conversation with Robert, and Emma listened thoughtfully, occasionally asking questions or making observations. "So basically, Mark's dad is playing matchmaker," Emma said when Sarah finished. "That's one way to put it." "Sarah, can I ask you something honestly?" Emma said, settling onto the couch beside her. "Do you want to get back together with Mark because you miss him? Or because his dad made you feel guilty about letting him go?" It was a fair question, and Sarah considered it carefully before answering. "I miss him, Emma. I've missed him every day since that night at his parents' house. But it's more than that. I think I've been so focused on the fact that he lied to me that I never really considered whether we could find a way to make both our dreams work." Emma nodded slowly. "Okay, but here's the thing, Sarah. Mark leaves tomorrow. If you're going to have this conversation with him, you need to have it now." Sarah drove to Mark's parents' house that evening with her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had rehearsed what she wanted to say during the entire 20-minute drive, but now that she was sitting in the driveway, all her carefully planned words seemed inadequate. The house was bustling with activity. Through the windows, she could see boxes stacked in the living room, and Linda moving back and forth with purpose. Mark's flight was early the next morning, and they were clearly in the middle of last-minute packing preparations. Sarah took a deep breath and walked to the front door. Linda answered after the first knock, her face showing surprise and then something that looked like relief. "Sarah, honey, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to Mark," Sarah said simply. "Is he here?" "He's upstairs packing," Linda said, stepping aside to let Sarah in. "But Sarah, are you sure this is a good idea? He's finally starting to accept that he's leaving tomorrow, and I'm worried that seeing you might make things harder for him." Sarah understood Linda's concern, but she had come too far to turn back now. "Linda, I know this might seem like bad timing, but there are things Mark and I need to say to each other before he leaves. Things that can't wait." Linda studied her face for a moment, then called upstairs. "Mark, you have a visitor." Sarah heard footsteps above, then Mark's voice calling back. "Mom, I really don't want to see anyone right now. Can you just tell them I'm busy?" "I think you'll want to see this person," Linda replied, giving Sarah an encouraging smile. The footsteps on the stairs were hesitant, and when Mark appeared at the bottom, his face went through a series of emotions. Surprise, hope, confusion, and finally a guarded wariness. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," she said, aware that Linda was hovering nearby, clearly curious about what was going to unfold. "Can we go somewhere private?" Mark nodded toward the back door. "We can sit on the porch." They walked outside into the warm evening air, and Sarah was reminded of all the times they had sat on this same porch swing, talking about their days, planning weekend activities, dreaming about their future together. The memory was both comforting and painful. "Mark, I had a conversation with your father today," Sarah began, deciding to dive straight into the heart of the matter. Mark's face immediately showed alarm. "Oh God, what did he say? Sarah, I'm so sorry if he said something inappropriate. He means well, but sometimes he doesn't know when to stay out of other people's business." "He told me about the job offer in New York," Sarah continued, "and about how he chose to stay here for your mother." Mark looked confused. "I don't understand. What does that have to do with us?" Sarah turned to face him fully on the porch swing. "He told me that real love isn't about choosing each other over your dreams. It's about finding a way to support each other's dreams, even when it's hard." Mark was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. "Sarah, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe we both approached this situation wrong," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as she found her footing. "You thought you had to choose between medical school and me. I thought your going to medical school meant you didn't love me enough. But maybe there's a third option we never considered." "What third option?" Mark asked quietly, but Sarah could see hope beginning to flicker in his eyes. "Maybe we could try to make this work long distance," Sarah said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating as she spoke them. "I'm starting my own business, which means I have flexibility to travel. You'll have breaks between semesters. It wouldn't be easy, but maybe it's possible." Mark stared at her as if she had just suggested they could fly to the moon. "Sarah, are you serious? After everything that's happened, after the way I hurt you, you'd be willing to try that?" "I'm not saying I'm ready to just forgive and forget," Sarah said carefully. "You broke my trust, Mark, and that's going to take time to rebuild. But I realized something today. I've been so focused on being angry about your choice that I never really considered whether it had to be the end of us." Mark reached for her hand, then stopped himself, his hand hovering in the air between them. "Can I touch you?" he asked softly. Sarah nodded, and Mark gently took her hand in both of his. "Sarah, I need you to know something. Every day since that night, I've regretted how I handled this. Not the decision to go to medical school, but the way I shut you out of the decision-making process." "Why did you do it, Mark? Really?" Mark looked down at their joined hands. "Because I was terrified that if I told you about the acceptance letter, you'd tell me to go, and then I'd have to choose between the two most important things in my life. I thought if I made the choice myself, it would somehow hurt less." "But it didn't hurt less, did it?" Sarah asked gently. "No," Mark admitted. "It hurt more because I not only lost you, but I lost you in a way that made me feel like the worst person in the world." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of the past month settling between them. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "Mark, if we're going to try this, we need to establish some ground rules. Complete honesty, even when it's scary. Regular communication, not just texts, but real conversations. And we both need to be committed to making it work, not just hoping it will work out." Mark squeezed her hand. "I can promise you complete honesty, Sarah. I never want to feel the way I've felt these past weeks again." "There's something else," Sarah said, taking a deep breath. "I need you to understand that I'm not putting my life on hold while you're in school. I'm building my own business, creating my own future. This can only work if we're both growing as individuals, not just waiting for the day when we can be together again." "I wouldn't want you to put your life on hold," Mark said earnestly. "Sarah, seeing you start your own business, watching you take control of your life, it's incredible. You're braver than I ever was." "We're both brave," Sarah corrected. "Following your dreams takes courage too. I was just too hurt to see it that way before." As they talked through the practical aspects of maintaining a long-distance relationship, Sarah felt a cautious optimism building in her chest. It wouldn't be easy, and there were no guarantees, but for the first time in weeks, she could envision a future that included both her dreams and Mark. "There's one more thing," Mark said as the conversation began to wind down. "I want you to have something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. Sarah recognized it immediately as the key to his apartment, the key she had returned to him the day after their breakup. "Mark, I can't take that back. We're not there yet." "It's not a key to my apartment," Mark said with a small smile. "It's a copy of the key to my father's Mustang." Sarah looked at him in confusion. "I don't understand." "That night, when my dad offered me the car, I said no because I thought I was giving up my family by leaving," Mark explained. "But he came to me yesterday and said that family isn't about staying in the same place. It's about carrying the people you love with you wherever you go." "Mark, I still don't understand why you're giving this to me. Because I want you to have something that connects you to my family while I'm gone," Mark said. "And because I want you to know that even though I'm leaving, you're still the person I want to share everything with." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she took the small key. "What if this doesn't work out, Mark? What if long distance is too hard?" "Then at least we'll know we tried," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, I'd rather have 6 months of really trying to make this work than spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if we had been brave enough to fight for us." Inside the house, Linda had been watching through the kitchen window, And when she saw Sarah and Mark embrace on the porch swing, she felt tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. Robert found her there, crying and smiling at the same time. "Are they working things out?" he asked, wrapping his arms around his wife. "I think they're going to try," Linda said. "Robert, what you said to that girl today, that was the right thing to do. I just didn't want them to make the same mistakes we made," Robert said, watching his son and Sarah through the window. "They're young and scared, but they love each other. Sometimes that's enough to build on." As the evening grew darker, Sarah and Mark made plans for how they would handle his departure and the weeks that followed. They would video call twice a week, not counting texts and spontaneous phone calls. Sarah would visit California during his winter break, and Mark would come home for a long weekend during his first semester if his studies allowed. Most importantly, they agreed that they would both pursue their individual goals with full commitment, supporting each other's dreams rather than seeing them as obstacles to their relationship. When it was time for Sarah to leave, Mark walked her to her car. They stood beside her open door, neither wanting to say goodbye. "This isn't goodbye," Sarah said finally. "This is, see you soon." "See you soon," Mark repeated, and they both knew he wasn't just talking about their next visit. As Sarah drove home, she felt a complex mix of emotions. There was still sadness for the pain they had both endured, uncertainty about what the future would hold, and fear that long distance might prove too difficult. But underneath all of that was something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. 18 months later, Sarah stood in the arrivals section of Los Angeles International Airport, her heart racing with a familiar mix of excitement and nervousness. Mark's first year of medical school was coming to an end, and she was flying in for his spring break. In her hand, she clutched the key to the 1967 Mustang that had started this whole journey. The past year and a half had been a roller coaster of challenges and triumphs. The long-distance relationship had tested them in ways neither had anticipated. There were nights when Sarah cried herself to sleep, missing Mark so intensely it felt like a physical ache. There were times when Mark was so overwhelmed with his studies that he barely had energy to talk, leaving Sarah feeling forgotten and unimportant. But there were also moments of incredible connection. Video calls that lasted until sunrise because neither wanted to hang up. Care packages sent across the country filled with favorite snacks and handwritten notes. Surprise visits that made the distance feel worth every moment of loneliness. Sarah's business had flourished beyond her wildest expectations. The flexibility of working for herself had allowed her to visit Mark 3 times during his first year, and she had even taken on 2 clients in California, making those trips partially tax-deductible business expenses. Her client base had grown to 15 regular accounts, and she had hired her first employee, a young woman fresh out of college who reminded Sarah of herself 5 years ago. More importantly, Sarah had discovered parts of herself she never knew existed. The confidence that came from building something from scratch, the satisfaction of solving complex problems for her clients, the joy of mentoring her new employee. She realized that the woman who had been devastated by Mark's departure 18 months ago was someone she barely recognized now. Mark emerged from the gate looking tired but happy, his medical school backpack slung over one shoulder and a huge smile spreading across his face when he spotted Sarah. When he reached her, he dropped his bag and lifted her off her feet in a hug that felt like coming home. "God, I missed you," he whispered into her hair. "I missed you too," Sarah replied, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the airplane smell that had become oddly comforting to her. They had planned to spend the week exploring California together, but first Mark had something he wanted to show Sarah. He led her to the parking garage where a familiar car was waiting. "You drove your dad's Mustang here?" Sarah asked in surprise. "Actually," Mark said with a grin, "my dad shipped it here 3 months ago. He said California was too far to drive every time I wanted to take my girlfriend on a proper date." As they drove through the California sunshine, top down and music playing, Sarah marveled at how different this felt from their relationship before. There was an ease between them now that hadn't existed when they lived in the same city. They had learned to appreciate the time they had together instead of taking it for granted. "Sarah," Mark said, as they pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex, "there's something I want to talk to you about." Sarah's stomach clenched slightly. Conversations that started with those words had not gone well for them in the past. "Before you panic," Mark said quickly, reading her expression, "it's good news. At least I hope you'll think it's good news." They went up to Mark's apartment, a small but comfortable place he shared with another medical student. His roommate was gone for spring break, so they had the place to themselves. "Okay, what's this mysterious good news?" Sarah asked, settling onto his couch. Mark sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "I've been accepted into a research program for my final 2 years of medical school." "Mark, that's incredible," Sarah said, genuinely excited for him. "What kind of research?" "Pediatric cardiology," Mark said, his eyes lighting up as he talked about it. "It's exactly what I want to specialize in, and getting into this program pretty much guarantees me a spot in one of the top residency programs in the country." "I'm so proud of you," Sarah said, leaning over to kiss him. "But wait, you said there was something you wanted to talk to me about. This seems like something you'd just be excited to share." Mark's expression became more serious. "The thing is, this research program, it's not here in California." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. "Where is it?" "Chicago," Mark said quietly. "Sarah, it's only a 4-hour drive from home." The implications of what he was saying hit Sarah like a lightning bolt. "Mark, are you saying you'd be moving back to the Midwest?" "I'm saying I'd be moving to within driving distance of you," Mark said carefully. "If that's something you think you might want." Sarah stared at him, processing this unexpected development. "When would this start?" "Next fall." "But Sarah, I need you to know that I applied for this program because it's the best opportunity for my career, not because it's closer to you. I learned my lesson about making major life decisions based on geography." "But you're happy that it's closer to me?" Sarah asked with a small smile. "I'm ecstatic that it's closer to you," Mark admitted. "Sarah, this year apart has shown me that our relationship can survive distance, but it's also shown me how much better my life is when you're in it more often." They spent the next hour talking about what this might mean for their relationship. Sarah had established roots with her business, but Chicago was a major market with huge potential for expansion. Mark would be incredibly busy with his research and clinical rotations, but he'd also have more predictable hours than he'd had in medical school. "There's something else," Mark said as their conversation began to wind down. "Something I should have done 18 months ago before everything got so complicated." Sarah watched as Mark got up from the couch and walked to his bedroom. He returned with a small velvet box that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. "Mark," she whispered. "Before you say anything," Mark said, kneeling down in front of the couch, "I want you to know that this isn't about the move to Chicago. This isn't about distance or timing or any of the practical things we've been talking about." He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring that was exactly what Sarah would have chosen for herself. "Sarah, these 18 months apart have taught me something important. I don't want to build a life and then try to fit you into it. I want to build a life with you from the ground up, where both our dreams matter and both our goals are priorities." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face, but she was smiling through them. "I'm not asking you to follow me to Chicago," Mark continued. "I'm asking if you want to explore Chicago together, as partners, as equals, as two people who learn that love isn't about giving up your dreams for each other, but about finding ways to dream together." Sarah slid off the couch to kneel in front of Mark, taking his face in her hands. "You know what the crazy thing is?" she said through her tears. "I was actually thinking about expanding to Chicago anyway. I have 3 potential clients there who have been asking me to consider opening a satellite office." Mark's face broke into a grin. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes to exploring Chicago together," Sarah said. That's a yes to building a life as partners, and that's definitely a yes to marrying you, Mark Thompson. As Mark slipped the ring onto her finger, Sarah thought about the key to the Mustang in her purse, the symbol of family and tradition that had once represented everything they thought they were losing. Now it represented something different. The understanding that love doesn't require you to stay in the same place, but it does require you to carry the people who matter most with you wherever you go. Later that evening, as they sat on Mark's apartment balcony watching the California sunset, Sarah called her sister Emma to share the news. "Wait," so he proposed. "And you're moving to Chicago?" Emma said, trying to keep up with the rapid-fire updates. "We're exploring." "Chicago together?" Sarah corrected. "And yes, he proposed, and yes, I said yes." "Sarah, I have to ask," Emma said, her voice growing more serious. "Are you sure about this? I mean, I'm happy for you, but 18 months ago, you were devastated because he made a major decision without you. Now you're making another major decision together. How do you know this time is different?" It was a fair question, and Sarah appreciated her sister's concern. "Because this time, we're not trying to fit our individual dreams into a relationship box," Sarah explained. "We're building something new together, where both our careers and goals matter equally." "And if it doesn't work out?" Sarah looked at Mark, who was talking animatedly on the phone with his parents, sharing their engagement news. "Then at least we'll know we tried everything we could to make it work. But Emma, I really think it's going to work. We're different people than we were 18 months ago, stronger individually, which makes us stronger together." As the phone calls to family and friends continued into the evening, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The rejection of the car that night at Mark's parents' house had felt like the end of everything. But it turned out to be the beginning of something better than either of them could have imagined. Alone.